afternoon. Probably can't hear me. Good afternoon. I'm going to go ahead and start our program. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming back to start our fall season here. I hope you all had a nice August off, and it's really nice to see everybody here again. We've got an even bigger crowd than usual, and hopefully that means that we're all back in the city, and that you're not only interested in the topic and our speakers, but all hear of us at AOI. The recap of our June meeting with Martin Muller and of our July Memories and Mimosas meeting, that recap is in our newsletter and it's on our website. So if there are no objections, I will take that as an official account of our meeting. Anybody object to that? Want to add anything? That's an easy one. All right, we will do that. You can catch that and all the information about both of those meetings on our website, but also on our YouTube channel. So do not forget, when you're standing in line at the bank and you're looking for something to do, pull out your phone, go to YouTube and go to AOI, and you can rewatch or watch any of our programs. I think I skipped over the introduction part of myself. I am Cindy Gwelly. I'm president this year of AOI. So welcome to all of you to be here and to identify some of you who are here and are new. I'm going to turn it over to Carolyn for our membership report.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Carolyn Michelle. I am the treasurer of AOI and membership person. We've been really busy over the summer, so I'm just going to read off the names of the new members. Nancy Turnbull, Christina Hanna, Philip Salin, Karen St. John, Louis Miller, Richard Wang, that was Lois Miller, sorry, Sarah Adams, Donna Hanasek, Dallas Lincoln Salisbury, who, by the way, is a descendant of Abraham Lincoln, so that makes him qualified to join. Stephanie Mae Ross, Michael Oslin, Inga Blust, and have I missed somebody's name? Sarah Adams. Okay, I did. Sarah Adams is here. Janet Nunn you joined in May at the meeting, so we met you the day you joined.
But you had my name wrong.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, go ahead and you're correcting it for the record. Go ahead.
Sarah Adams, could you stand so we can just see and welcome you? And Inga just joined today on the spot.
Terrific.
And do we have any visitors that would just like to stand and get a warm welcome? So please stand. We just want to give a welcome.
Simon right over here.
Okay. Welcome. We got another one.
It's Fred Valentine, who played professional baseball.
Oh, welcome. Okay, I think that concludes the membership report.
Great, thank you. Well, welcome. We promise both new members and guests to make you not regret this, and then hope to be here today and to hopefully entice you to come back to us again. We've got some brief news to go through. Next week, to announce our speaker for then, we had a rescheduling, so we are now going to have DC's first state archivist come to talk to us about the state of the DC archives and 21st century archives. That's Dr. Lopez Matthews, and he will be here in October. We'll be announcing our speaker series for 2024 soon, so look for that in the newsletter as well. We're also organizing a tour of the Queen City Memorial in Arlington, a guided tour of that. So you can look forward to that as well, where we will all meet in Arlington and have the artist talk to us about what it meant and what it represents. And get ready to go through your closet. It's not spring cleaning, but hopefully fall cleaning. We are working on, hopefully in the spring, late spring, a version of an Antiques Roadshow style event. And you can bring in any related item to DC history, photos, letters, memorabilia, mementos, and we will have archivists, representatives from libraries, all there to tell you what might be worth going into the archives, what you might want to do with it, and what might just have sentimental value, and that you should keep for family. But if you have something that you have wondered what to do with for years that is sitting on your shelf, this might be a good time to think about it, pull it out, and bring it in. So we'll give you more information about that as we get that. Our Memories and Mimosas event was a success, thanks to everybody who contributed and told us things maybe that you shouldn't have, but that we were really fascinated about. So we thank you for that. So we're going to be doing another one of those in the spring as well. I'm also going to be following up with those of you who mentioned on your sheets from that day that you might be willing to participate in and give us a little bit more of your history for an AOI oral history project. So I'll be following up with you, but if anybody else is interested in that, please contact me. We're going to be working on that in 2024 as well. We also are still accepting about our members' information for the newsletter, so please keep those coming. We do have some that we are still waiting to get into the next newsletters, but we need more. So please go ahead and send those in as well. A couple of things that might be of interest to you that are coming up on the calendar. There is a Punk and Go-Go Live at MLK at the library this Sunday from 1 to 5. So I think it's going to be on the rooftop. It should be a fairly nice weekend, I think at least on Sunday for that. At the City Tavern in Georgetown, they have a series of 5 free lectures on the history of Georgetown and the history of DC, both history and architecture. And that next one kicking off is going to be October 5th. So you're interested in Georgetown history. There is a DC Preservation League walking tour on Saturday, September 30th on historic department stores in downtown DC. You can go to their website if you're interested in signing up for that. And there is an Art All Night event that they sometimes have in the different neighborhoods around DC. That will be in Georgetown on Friday, the 29th. That has music, art, workshops, kind of gallery displays, as well as kids' activities there as well, if you're interested. So get out, enjoy the city. Such gorgeous weather to be able to take advantage of everything that we have here. I am going to turn it over now to Nelson for the first time for a trivia question for today.
Okay, some of you may know or not know that the Association of Oldest Inhabitants of the District of Columbia, since 1865, when they were organized, has been testifying on Capitol Hill for home rule and voting rights. The trivia question is, what bill did they support in 1973? I'll have to give you some clues. Now, the rules are, if you've won trivia before, please don't participate, at least not initially. We want to give this to somebody new. So, and I will provide some clues. It was a bill that was first introduced that they caught on to and liked that had been introduced actually by Colbert King when he was a member of the House of Representatives. Longtime supporter of home rule. Now, it was not a bill to give the district an elected mayor and city council, but what form of government was it? Governor, that's it. Maybe that's close enough. It was a territorial government. A governor and a legislative assembly. The legislative assembly was very interesting. 5 districts were carved out in a district, 5 electoral districts. 5 members of the legislature would be elected from each district, and only 4 of the members could be of the same political party, guaranteeing diversity and political party representation on the council. This was a continuing issue, which I might get a little chance to talk about in the 1973 effort to get home rule. So we have a winner.
I want to introduce our speaker who you just heard speak. So Nelson is going to be starting our program today, and not the trivia question, as well as probably what you already know about Nelson, is not going to surprise you as to why we are today talking about the 50th anniversary of Home Rule. So while many of us know Nelson, you might not know his background. So I'm going to give you a little bit of his background so you get to know him better. Nelson moved to Washington at the end of 1970 and soon began to work at the Congressional Research Service Government Division as an analyst in American national government. There he was assigned to cover congressional requests for information and research about D.C. political and governmental affairs. This experience led to his detail assignment in 1973 to the House Committee on the District of Columbia to assist with the development of home rule legislation. There he worked directly with Chairman Charles C. Diggs, and there's some in the handouts that you have. There's a little bit more information about Diggs if you don't know some of his background, providing research and writing on every area of D.C. history and governance to underpin the structure of a new locally elected government for the district where none had existed in the previous 100 years. He wrote committee reports on subjects such as taxes and finance, previous local governments in the 19th century, the origin of the executive legislation clause in the U.S. Constitution, transportation, city planning, and building height regulations, just to name a few. Following the passage of the Home Rule Charter Act at the end of 1973, Nelson left the Library of Congress to work directly for the House Committee on the District of Columbia as the Director of Research and continued there until his retirement from Congress in 1992. He was also chosen by Chairman Diggs to serve as his delegate on the National Capital Planning Commission. Since leaving Congress, Nelson has participated in numerous civic causes, such as the preservation of historic Rose Tavern, service on the board of the Washington Historical Society, and research for the publication of City of Magnificent Intentions, which is the history and civics textbook that is most used in all of the D.C. public schools. Along with former president of AOI, Bill Brown, he has discovered lost records and information about the history of AOI, and especially the origins and history of its brother association, which was the African-American version of AOI. That is also going to be the topic of an upcoming lunch discussion, as well, as one of our current board members is a descendant from both of those, had descendants in both of those organizations. Nelson has provided expert testimony before federal and local governments, agencies, and congressional committees on issues such as preserving historic landmarks like the World War I Memorial on the Mall, preserving building height regulations, and improving archival facilities of the District of Columbia. Nelson was the Republican candidate for the District of Columbia delegate to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2014, 2018, and 2022. And he has been here at AOI on the board since the 1990s and has served as our historian here for many years, hence the trivia questions for those of you who don't know him. And he is certainly a beloved and impactful member for us here. So we're so proud to have him here, to be able to share what is obviously a wealth of knowledge that is going to be hard to find anywhere else. And I turn it over to Nelson. Thank you.
Okay. A technical question. Am I to introduce Colby at this point? Okay, I thought so. I don't want to forget you. And like myself, Colbert King is a Washingtonian born and bred. He attended D.C. public schools and graduated from Howard University. From there, he went on to excel in more careers than most other folks might be able to squeeze into 4 lifetimes. Diplomacy at the State Department, including 3 years at the U.S. Embassy in Bonn. International banking and financial services. He was director of the World Bank, then as executive vice president, member of the board of directors of Riggs Bank. The federal government is deputy assistant secretary of the Treasury, working on international legislation. And in journalism, at the Washington Post, where he continues to write his weekly column today, he received a 2000 American Society of Newspaper Editors Distinguished Writing Award for commentary column writing, and 2003 the Pulitzer Prize for commentary, quote, for his against the grain columns that speak to people in power with ferocity and wisdom, unquote. He is still speaking to people in power with ferocity and wisdom, and we're glad of that. But during the years that were pertinent to today's program, from 1972 to 76, he was serving as minority staff director of the Senate's District of Columbia Committee, where he helped draft home rule legislation and campaign finance and conflict of interest rules for the District of Columbia government. He is married for 62 years to the Honorable Gwendolyn Stewart King, a former commissioner of the U.S. Social Security Administration, who might have saved Social Security. And so we are pleased that she is able to be with us here today. I'm trying to keep these remarks as brief as possible in order to give Mr. King more time to talk. A list of his awards and honors would take way too long. So without further ado, I will turn this over to Mr. King to talk about his experiences of the compromises and cooperation that went into passing the bill, along with his assessment of where home rule is today and what has worked and what needs improvements over 50 years.
Thank you very much, Nelson, for that introduction. Seems as though we've been doing this for a long time now.
I hope it's not over.
It's not over yet. When I was 11 years old, at Stevens Elementary School, in 1951, the principal called us to an assembly and had Miss Lee, the music teacher, teach us a song that the commissioners of District of Columbia had declared would be the Song of Washington. And here are the lyrics. Washington, if you know it, join with me. Washington, the fairest city and the greatest land of all, named for one, our country's father who answered freedom's call. God bless the White House, the Capitol too, and keep ever flying the red, white, and blue. Grandest place beneath the sun is Washington. It was 1951. Notice the song didn't have a word in it about neighborhoods in the District of Columbia, anything about the District of Columbia. Nothing about my neighborhood, Foggy Bottom, West End, the District of Columbia, just a few blocks south of here. It was a federal city. It wasn't the District of Columbia, 1951. We sang praises to a Congress and a White House that made us go to public schools that were separate from white kids. We asked for the red, white, and blue to wave over a city where at the time all the garbage men and the trash men were colored. And all of the police, all of the firefighters, all of the streetcar operators were white. We sang of a city in 1951 as little kids where our parents, our neighbors, church members couldn't go to certain restaurants, go to certain movie theaters. That's the city we sang praises about. Self-government was so far from our minds. We were governed by 3 commissioners appointed by the president. I say all that to say that years after that, we had something called Home Rule in 1973. But there's a false narrative out here that this was the first time the district had elected officials. I mean, Nelson knows this better than I. Go back to 1802, the organic law was started for the district. Had a governor. 1848, we had a territorial government with delegates elected in the district. Now, franchise wasn't what it was today. Women didn't vote, blacks didn't vote, but people voted. And everything went well like that until about 20 years later. See, in those days, the district had no sidewalks, mud everywhere. It was just no infrastructure at all. But along came Governor Shepard. Boss Shepard, they called him. And he built. And he built. And he put sidewalks here, and he had horses' troughs there, and he fancied up the city to the point where we were at $22 million in debt. At which point, Congress said, enough of this. We're taking it back. And they appointed 3 commissioners to run the city. And it stayed that way for almost 100 years until Lyndon Johnson came along and appointed government. I'm saying that to make another point, and then we can kick it back and forth. This business of home rule has really been an incremental story. People didn't wake up in 1973 and say, oh, let's delegate a little authority to people in the District of Columbia so they can govern their own affairs. It didn't happen that way. There was no aha moment, let's do this. But over a period of time, there were changes. Electing a member to the delegate, electing our own school boards, voting in presidential elections, all of those things happen incrementally. And now 50 years have gone by, just like that. And I think the city's assurance that it will always be this way is on weak grounds. If home rule were put to a popular vote today in the House of Representatives, might not even make it through the Senate. And that's where we are. Because there's no such thing as a permanent victory in this business. This business of self-government is an ongoing process. And it's one that needs to be protected and defended. And so I would love to be able to stand here 50 years later, after what we saw, we went through Nelson 50 years ago, and say, oh, we're there now, we made it, let's move on to something else. No, we have to still protect and defend what we have if we want to see it not another 50 years, just another 10 years. It's the weather's fine outside, but the political climate is rotten. And that's something we just need to bear in mind. As advocates of home rule who've done over the years, you know, one thing that hits me, during the inauguration of Dwight Eisenhower, there's a photo taken along Pennsylvania Avenue. He's riding in his limousine, he's waving, and there's a little girl standing in a corner, and she's holding a sign. She says, "Home rule, please." She was white. Home rule has never been, although the narrative suggests otherwise, has never been a piece that's been advocated simply by black people. It was a majority white District of Columbia that called for home rule in 1951. And all the years in between. It was a coalition of people in the city who worked for this, Democrats and Republicans. As a matter of fact, the home rule enjoyed solid, and I say solid, Republican support in the United States Senate. When we passed it in 1973, it took all, in the Senate, all of 3 hours. Because the Senate had passed it several times, 8 times, between 1948 and 1950 something. sort of gave up because on the House there was somebody named Let's hear it. Let's hear it. Johnny Macmillan, where home rule bills went to a graveyard. And what changed that was not what we did here, but what happened in 1965 when the Voting Rights Act passed. And all of a sudden, Johnny Mack found himself with a constituency that could vote in his district. First time around, Johnny Mack, and he hadn't had an opponent in years. First time around, he squeaked it out. He defeated a doctor, a black medical doctor. That didn't last long. 2 years later, Johnny Mack was defeated. And that changed the dynamic in the House, as Nelson can tell you, when Charlie Diggs became chair of the House District Committee. And that's the key here, the dynamic of this, the home rule, self-government. It grows here, but we need support out there to get it, to sustain it. We made an advance since then, temporarily. The people know that when Jimmy Carter was president, we probably took our greatest step forward for self-government. Under his leadership, a bipartisan House and Senate enacted a bill giving full voting rights on Congress to the district, voting members of the Senate and the House. It passed. And failed when it got out into the states, and we couldn't muster the votes to pass that constitutional amendment. Same situation today. Can we sustain what we're doing with support of the country? And that's to be demonstrated. That's to be demonstrated. That's to be learned, because I don't think we're there at this point. I just want to make one sort of segue to something else. I'm sitting here, I'm looking at Inga Blust, who just joined as a member. Gwen and I met Inga and Merck Blust in Bonn, West Germany, in 1966, July 1966. And Inga, I'm so glad to see you here again. I'm going to stop now. I celebrated my 84th birthday yesterday. One of the things you learn is that you can't stand long. I'm leaning, but I think I'm going to have to get down here with Nelson. But thank you very much.
Would you like to come sit on the stage and you can answer questions from the stage?
She asked me if I'd like to sit on the stage. I'd like to sit anywhere. You know, people say, it's good to be here. These days, it's good to be anywhere. Nelson, I think I took your water.
I'll switch it.
I'm all right.
We do have a mic that will be coming around, so I think we're going to be opening up the floor very soon to questions. So if you have, which I'm sure we do.
Okay, well, I have a couple of important things to get out of the way first that are related somewhat to the issue today. 25 years ago, Colbert King was asked by a columnist with the city paper whether he would ever consider running for political office in the District of Columbia. He responded, "If nominated, I will not campaign." "And if elected, I will be impeached." Well, my situation is a little different. I have run for office in the District of Columbia. And had I been declared the winner, I would have asked for a recount, because I ran as a Republican. Well, as Colby mentioned, it was very important to get Johnny Mack going. And a plan was hatched for that in 1963 in an interesting meeting. I get my notes here. At an interesting meeting at Billy Simpson's House of Seafood. I better put my glasses on. I'll function much better. Okay. That's a good idea. On a January evening in 1963, Representative Charles Diggs, Jr., Democrat of Michigan, Representative Adam Clayton Powell, Jr., Democrat, New York, Charles S. Chuck Stone, a journalist and aide to Powell, were dining and imbibing at Billy's House of Seafood on George Avenue. The assembled gentlemen were discussing an agenda for the upcoming Congress when the subject of how home rule for the district came up. At some point, Powell looked at Diggs and made the following proposition: "Charlie, we are going to see the Speaker in the morning and arrange to put you on the House Committee on the District of Columbia." Powell reasoned it might take years, but eventually seniority would put Diggs in the chair of the committee, and home rule legislation could be reported to the House for enactment. After initial resistance and considerable debate, Diggs was afraid he might have to give up his seat on the Veterans Affairs Committee. He's also on the Committee on Foreign Affairs, and he really didn't want to give up a committee. But Powell said, "We can arrange that. The Speaker will give you an exception, I'm sure." So he was convinced. Next day, he found himself on the D.C. Committee in a new Congress. Powell, of course, reasoned that he was young, only 40 years old, and from a safe district, that he could raise up in seniority. It might take a number of years. They hoped it wouldn't take 10, which it did. But that was very important to have somebody, when they got Johnny Mack out, who was in a position to take over the committee. There were other conditions that had to come together in 1973 to have home rule make it through. The Board of Trade had to be convinced to support home rule. It had been against home rule vigorously and had a lot of clout in Congress. There had to be a president in office who was really committed to getting home rule through. By 1972, they knew that Johnny Mack was in trouble. Walter Fauntleroy and others went down into the district, organized church groups to get together to get out the vote. And they were successful. Johnny Mack was defeated. And Diggs was right there, ready to take the chairmanship. The other event that was important, going back a little bit, was the election of a delegate to the District of Columbia. When Richard Nixon came in to the presidency in 1969, he sent a message to Congress. Let's get a delegate to the House, number one, and let's get an elected local government, and then go to work on representation in the Congress. By 1970, he gotten a bill through the House. The Association of Oldest Inhabitants testified in favor of that bill. And retired Major General Lewis Prentice, I don't know if anybody remembers him, he was then the president of AOI. And he ended his testimony by saying, we've always historically been for a delegate to the House, but why should we stop there? Let's have one in the Senate too. And that happened. A bill was sent over to the Senate for a delegate to the House and Senate. Joseph Tidings, chairman of the Democrat of Maryland, chair of the Committee on the District of Columbia, said, nope, can't do that. All the delegates from the territories will be lining up outside to get into the Senate. Can't have that. So we didn't get him. But this came up again in the Home Rule Act. We got it through on the House side, was sent over to the Senate. We got the same response. Tom Eagleton, Missouri Democrat, stood up and said at the beginning of the House Conference Committee, said, everything's on the table, gentlemen, except the delegate to the Senate. And so we didn't get a delegate to the Senate. Walter Fauntleroy pursued that issue during his tenure and was not successful. A major concern in the House particularly for home rule was, will one-party government work? They knew it was going to be a one-party system here, maybe, unless they found a way to make it possible to have minority party representation, other party representation. Interestingly, two very liberal members of the House D.C. Committee, Brock Adams of Washington and Donald Fraser of Minnesota, took this up as an issue. They had served on councils, local councils in their home states, and said it's very important to have diversity in political party representation on local legislative bodies. And they pushed for nonpartisan elections, which got into the House bill. Well, in the conference committee, Tom Eagleton stood up again, said no. This is his words from the record. Where I come from, elections are partisan we're going to have partisan elections. Shows you the power of one senator and one member the House could had on what we got in Home Rule. So, in the committee, they had, in the committee on the House, runoff elections were also pursued. Oh, maybe should have runoff elections. There was no support for that among the Democratic establishment in Washington, none whatsoever. Only one local Democratic leader testified in favor of runoffs, Marion Barry. Very strong testimony. Said, one man, one vote. It's not democracy if you have people getting elected with less than 50% of the vote. Well, guess what? That would have come back to bite him if it got into the Home Rule Act. In 1978, in the Democratic primary for mayor, the first time he ran for mayor, he got 35% of the vote. Sterling Tucker, 34%. Incumbent Mayor Washington, 31%. Barry was 1,400 votes. If there had been runoffs, he wouldn't have been elected. Now, there were some limitations, interesting limitations put into the Home Rule Act. One was building heights. Again, it shows the power of one member taking an interest in an issue at the time. Pete Stark of California, a junior member of the committee, a Democrat, had just had been elected and joined the committee. He moved that the council be prohibited from amending the Home Rule, the Building Height Acts of the 1890s. And he argued, he said, I've been traveling in London and Paris recently, and you should see what they're building there. They had building height limit laws have been loosened, and areas where there was tradition, by tradition, they kept building heights low or now been thrown away. And I don't want that to happen here in D.C. Now we'll go to a couple of slides. Give you a little rest from my talking.
Which one do you want?
Well, start. Oh, go back to, well, that was a good one. Go back to the building height. We just did building height. A little exaggeration, but makes a point. And it's going to be a recurring issue, the building height. The local government would like to get a hold of it, no question about it. And there'll be a tug of war over it for some time, I think. These were the major issues. Some of the major issues, particularly on both sides, but particularly on the House side. The Republicans favored a appointed governor or an appointed mayor, not elected. That was their one thing that they really pounded on.
You're talking about the House side?
Yes. Okay. And I hope you know something about the Senate side. Good. I really didn't know a whole lot that was going on the Senate side. That's why he's here. And and of course we just talked about partisan versus nonpartisan elections. And now the compromise that they came up with, interestingly, in the committee when they get together, the two committees in the conference committee, they can really rewrite parts of their both bills. They have a lot of leeway to do that. As long as it's a subject that's in either bill, they can work with it. They can massage it, they can amend it, they can do a lot of things with it. And the compromise was 2 seats on the House legislature, of the 4 at-large seats, 2 would be reserved for non-majority party. And that worked for a while. Three Republicans were elected in the earlier days of home rule to those seats. But the government found a way to allow Democrats to run, put an I after their name, although there is no independent party. The charter says parties, political parties. It's very clear. And they run as independent Democrats. And they serve as Democrats on the council. They can chair committees. They do everything that the other Democrats do. So that compromise has not worked out.
Well,
What do you think?
it didn't quite happen that way.
Okay.
What they did, the Senate had nonpartisan elections. What they did was they came up with affirmative action for the Republican Party. They reserved seats for persons of only one party. Republicans couldn't hold it in the elections. They got supplanted by the statehood party and independents.
Stahoods, that's a good point.
To the point where the Republican Party in the District of Columbia is non-existent. I'm sorry, it does exist. So, it does exist.
I'm right here. I'm it.
Barely. They're breathing. But that's the problems. What had happened in the House, the compromises that Diggs had to make with the Republicans in the House side. There were no problems like that on the Senate side. Although Tom Eagleton did want elected partisan elections. But we did nonpartisan elections. Then in conference, he said very clearly, I've always believed in partisan elections. And he conceded to the House. Yeah, we'll go with you on partisan elections. That's how it happened. I sat there and watched every bit of it. Sorry.
That's why we have you here, to keep me honest. I thought I'd just say briefly about the Founding Fathers. There were 32 members of the House and Senate committees that worked on this. There were no women on the committees, so it was all men. They came from 22 states. There were only 2 Southerners, which was interesting, both Bill Stuckey of Georgia, or the Stuckey Pekin place is still in operation in Georgia, I don't know. When I was a kid, we used to travel through down there, and you had to stop at Stuckey's. And James Mann of South Carolina, both turned out to be supporters of home rule. No trouble. Of course, the issue of taxation was up early. Would the Council of the District of Columbia be able to tax the income of non-residents that was earned in the District of Columbia? Well, we know what happened to that. The senators from Maryland and Virginia and even Pennsylvania and Delaware came out, we can't have that, And so we didn't get the ability to tax the income of non-residents. And I guess we probably never will. Judges, the appointment of judges was a major issue. The Senate allowed that the local mayor would appoint the judges and be confirmed by the council. When it was on the House side, the Justice Department came out against that. Said, no, we keep the judges appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate. We still have that today. There is some participation by the mayor. That there's now a commission that makes recommendations, and there is representatives from the district that serve on that. So there's some input, local input, in the appointment of judges, but nothing like complete authority to appoint the judges. Advisory neighborhood councils were an issue. We have them today, and they've turned out, many people didn't think they would really amount to much, but they have in many cases. Interesting, Walter Fauntleroy introduced a bill in 1972, his home rule bill, had advisory neighborhood councils. And but the issue was, he was joined in the House by Donald Fraser of Minnesota, because in Minnesota city government they had advisory neighborhood councils. He knew how they worked. He was very favorable, and between he and Fauntleroy, they were able to convince the House to put them into the home rule bill. The Senate was not enthusiastic. They thought it would just be duplication. I don't know what remember the real arguments. But, and they were about ready to kill them. The Senate was ready to say, no, there'll be no. The compromise was, oh, well, the vote to approve them has to be separate from the charter itself, and it has to be a majority vote of all registered voters. They knew this would kill it, because as we know, 100,000 registered voters are dead or missing. And, well, a compromise was made there, of course, too, that it was finally amended and went to the vote. And so we have neighborhood advisory councils. To again show how one person could have influence on what got in the charter, Sterling Tucker, near the end of the deliberations on the House side, went to Chairman Diggs and said, we should make the election of the chairman of the council a separate election. In the bill was that the chairman would be elected from members of the council itself. He was successful. Diggs moved and got into the House bill and it was accepted. And so we elect the chairman of the council separately today.
Sterling Tucker also came to us at the same time and asked us to raise the salary of the chairman of the House to the council. We did. Increase the salary.
Did that happen?
Yeah, it happened.
Yeah. The salaries were another interesting point. The idea on the House side was that the members of the council would be part-time. So their salary was very low. It was lower than half of what the mayor's was. Mayor's was $42,000. I think the councils were $20,000. And that, of course, got changed quickly. Once they got in power, they raised their salaries through the roof. But the original idea was that they'd be part-time. And so now they're full-time, and, you know, you may have your opinion one way or the other, whether full-time is better than part-time. I did want to, before we get into some other things, I wanted to end about presidents, about how important presidents were in all of this. Eisenhower is really the first president that really put it all out on the table and got national attention to it. And he early on in his administration, he said to Congress, "Send me something. Send me a delegate to the House about elected local government, or look into representation in Congress, or the vote for president." Well, couldn't get through anything. He actually put Richard Nixon, as vice president, in charge of trying to get some of this through. He wasn't successful either. The district committees were not receptive, and he did get through in his last days. It got through the vote for president. Came the 23rd Amendment. It got the 2/3 vote in the House and the Senate. The vote representation in the House almost made it. It got through the Senate. House, it got tied up. It lost by a couple of votes in the Judiciary Committee on the House side. But the 23rd Amendment did get through. In 1964, we voted for the first time in 90 years for anything in the District of Columbia. Voted for president. Did anybody here vote in the District of Columbia in the 1964 presidential election? Okay. Well, for those of you who didn't and want to vote, I have some leftover ballots. from that election. Very simple. You go to vote for the elephant or the jackass. If you couldn't read the names of the candidates. And that was the standard at the time.
2 years before that vote, they had a primary election, partisan primary election. And my wife and I were classmates at the time, and we handed out literature to people who were going to vote for the first time in the primary election. That would have been 1961.
This is what you were handing out?
No, it wasn't home rule.
No, this is home rule, right. This is for the vote.
It wasn't home rule.
This is for the vote.
But if it weren't for that particular day where we had that volunteer activity, we never would have really met and married 2 years later. So I remember that process very well. Plus, we got credit from our political science professor for volunteering at the polls for that election.
There you go.
So I remember all of that very, very well. Don't remember yesterday, but I remember that very well.
Well, we've talked about, go next slide. We'll go through the slides now to end it up, because there's a few things I probably left out. Here's Richard Nixon. We talked about him. I don't know if I mentioned it, when he came to Congress in 1946, he was appointed to the D.C. committee, and one of the first bills he voted for was home rule. So he knew the game from the beginning. And then in the Senate, he was assigned to the D.C. committee and watched some bills die over there. And so he had, he knew about the issue. And next. Go back to the tavern scene. They got to see the tavern. Okay, there's Billy Simpson's Tavern. Does anybody remember Billy Simpson's Tavern? Okay. Important plan was hatched there. Georgia Avenue. Yep, I have the address here somewhere, yep. Okay, go on. Next. Waller Fauntleroy was elected the first delegate, 1970, and he really helped organize the last plan to get Johnny McMillan out. He really did. He deserves credit for that, and I'm glad that we can do that today. He is in February, he turned 90. He's not getting around as well as he used to. He was invited to come today, and he just can't, sadly. I don't know. Does anybody know the people behind him? No. Okay. Good. We can put that up in the back of the picture we have. Good. Okay. Next. Okay. Here are the two chairs of the Senate and the House D.C. Committee, Charles Diggs and Thomas Eagleton. We did talk about them and some of their involvement. Very important. And these are the Republicans. I said Anchor Nelson was really, he'd go along with almost everything. He was a little, would like to have seen an appointed mayor, not an elected mayor, but an elected council or some of the rest of it. And Charles Mathias, who knew the issue very well, and as I mentioned in the House, he had 4 terms in the House before he was elected to the Senate, and had introduced home rule bills there.
Nelson, we have about 25 minutes left, so I want to make sure we get to questions. Would it be
Okay.
okay if we open it up to questions at this
I'll
point?
wrap it up. I just want to finish the slides. We only got a couple. Go ahead. This is a cartoon I like. It's just before the bill went to the floor of the House and for a vote. This is Diggs. D.C. is the catcher, and the batter is the House. For this, put this one in there, and we've got it. Did we have the one of the other cartoon? That's it. The beginning, I guess. Yeah. Okay. I want to get Eleanor Holmes Norton, and with Eleanor Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt. There. In 1940, First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt testified before the House D.C. Committee in favor of home rule. Her husband never uttered a word on the subject. Not a word. She appeared, and here she is testifying, and they had it in a special room, had an overflow crowd, and this is a picture. I'd like to get a picture of it framed and hung somewhere here in this building. I think it deserves to be seen. Okay, let's open it up to the audience.
We've got mics for you, and if you could give us your name as you.
Somebody knows me. Yes, my name is Barbara D. Morgan, and I'm a native Washingtonian. I went to Francis Junior High School.
I did too. Okay, with Francis.
Yes, I
Sing
did.
with me.
And
Sing,
Miss
dear
Plummer,
Francis,
Miss Plummer
hail
was my
how we
principal.
love thy name. Will we ever fail to be true? Will you sing it with me?
I graduated from Francis a year, I think. Miss Roberts was the first person to serve on the school board. Remember her? Gladys Roberts?
Appointed?
Yes, appointed.
Yeah.
I'm a native Washingtonian, and I was born in 1933.
Oh, boy.
I taught school in Washington, D.C., and the one person that I did not see up there was Faircloth. He was, yes. He was the one who fought against us also. And he was the one that was against Marion Barry. Am I correct? Look at your history.
Yeah, he was not only that, he is responsible for shifting DC inmates from being housed at the District of Columbia to the Federal Bureau of Prisons,
That's right.
and where they're scattered all around the country. He is responsible for shifting the budget. I'm writing about this in my column again, of the superior courts, the entire court system, to the federal government, where they control it, and where we have 11 vacancies and we can't get them appointed.
That's the point that we needed to make sure. That's why I am an advocate for the school board of the District of Columbia to be a separate entity and not under the mayor. We need a superintendent of schools.
Well, not only do you have a superintendent of schools,
We don't have it here in the
you
district
have,
anymore.
beyond a superintendent of schools, you also have a state superintendent for education with several state assistant superintendents. That's not enough. We have now a deputy mayor for education,
Not doing nothing.
reporting to the mayor. And that's how it's changed so much in the last 6 years, starting with Adrian Fenty, when he became mayor, and he shifted responsibility away from the school board to himself.
Now, I want to make another point. Don Frazier. See, we were the guinea pigs, all of us who were citizens of the District of Columbia. The reason that he brought and fought for home rule was because he wanted to try it out here in the district before he took it back to his state. And the reason I know that because I served on that committee. I was appointed to serve on the Home Rule Committee. I also served on the Democratic National Committee with John Heckinger, Lillian Huff, and I was the other person. So I know a lot of history, and that's one of the things that we need to bring back so that the children of the District of Columbia will know the history of this city. They don't know it.
You're here.
I have to agree with that. Mm-hmm.
I'm Ann Lyko, and I just wanted to say one thing that I think was sort of missing. In the 223 years that the District of Columbia has existed, and we had, you mentioned in passing, elected officials in the first 74 years, basically, which would include the territorial government. But the territorial government and the other forms of government, much like what's happening in Home Rule and with Congress, overturned some of our criminal justice laws that the council has passed, is they're saying out there that Congress can get rid of everything that you guys worked so hard for and that we have worked so hard for in a blink. And the only thing they can't get rid of is what we need to be working for, which is statehood. So we have the same rights as anybody else in any part of the United States. And everything else is, we're still a colony. And they can give it to us today, and tomorrow the next guy can come in and want to get rid of it. I don't know how many people here realize that our first congressional non-voting delegate in the House was in 1871. And we had him for 3 years. Norton Chipman, I think was his name. He was a Civil War Chipman. He was a Civil War general. But they give things to us and they take them away. and we're treated like shit, no matter how you look at it. And we need to be demanding and encouraging everybody across this country to realize that we're Americans, and to be full Americans, we need to have the same rights as everybody else, which means we need to be part of a state. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Tim Hannibal, and I have a question for Colby King and Nelson, if you want to comment as well. The last questioner made the point so well about they can take away, and the most recent example of that just came in March when Congress overruled the Crime Act, and the president signed it. You know, the president signed it. So my question to you is, how do we keep their damn hands out of our city?
Well, earlier in the year, last year, February or March, I wrote a column about this saying that if the House turned over to the Republicans in the election, that all of this was in jeopardy. Everything the city was doing would be in jeopardy. The suggestion at the time was, well, get off your butts and participate in the effort to hold on to the House. District residents, you have the means, you have the motives for doing it. You didn't do it. So this Congress comes in, hostile. They said it. To me, fair warning is fair play. They said, give us a chance, we're going to take it back. You had members on the record who said it last year. If we get it, the House, we're going to go after self-government. They said that. There's no secret about that. So what did we do? We did nothing. Did we leave the John Wilson building and make visits on the Hill and talk to people? Used to happen once upon a time. Once upon a time, you could count on Walter Washington, Sterling Tucker, a number of people making that trek to the Hill, talking to people, talking to them, not talking at them over a witness table, but talking to them in their offices, going up to see them. You'd be surprised what person-to-person contact will do. Yeah. But you got to look them in the eye. You got to look them in the eye. This city government that is currently constituted doesn't do that. They don't do it. You got to work at this thing. You got to work at this thing. And we haven't done it. And it's frittered away because we haven't done it. We prefer to sit back and give out press releases and call names. That's fine. Makes you feel good. Makes you feel good. Take a bow, take a bow, take a bow. But it doesn't change anything. And you get steamrolled. And that's what's happening now as we speak. So don't get me on my soapbox. Some of this is going to be in my column on the weekend anyway. I got to go home and write now. I have ways to go in my column.
Well, a comment on statehood. To get statehood, we have to first amend the Constitution. I'm sorry, but we do. We can't get there by straight legislation. It won't happen. Believe me, it won't happen.
But not because there's not a legal argument in favor of it. There's a legal argument in favor of it. Now, you may say politically it's not feasible, but you cannot say legally it's not an argument in favor. And I'd be happy to send you legal opinions on this subject.
Well, there's a legal opinion by Attorney General Robert Kennedy that would dispute that. He said you cannot get home rule by straight legislation. That you can't carve out, you can't reduce, wait a minute, that you can't reduce the size of the federal government without amending the Constitution. And he says that what was done in 1846 was unconstitutional. And the Supreme Court more or less said that in the 1880s, but too much time has elapsed. We can't undo it. But they said it was unconstitutional.
Well, you all may leave, but he and I are going to talk about this for a while.
My name is Chip Carlson.
Okay, that's enough on statehood.
One thing, my name is Chip Carlson, and I worked for 2 congressmen, Republicans, in the House for 14 years and so forth. And the second one that I worked for, I was asking, okay, look, we really would like to be a state. He says, we don't want you as a state, but we want your money. That's what he said.
I'm sorry, who said?
I'm not going to say who he was.
I didn't get
He
the
was
point.
a Republican.
It was a member of Congress?
Yes. And the, I just had the other one, I just lost it. But that's, congressional courtesy. Having worked for the legislative branch for these congressmen, one of the things they love the most is a letter from a person out of state talking to the congressman, we want you to do this. And automatically, congressional courtesy, they refer the letter to that person's congressman. And so if you don't show up in person, you're not going to do anything with the congressman. He's just going to pass it all to your home representative.
Hi, I'm Loretta Newman, and I do want to disagree somewhat. I've enjoyed this both, and I agree with most of what Mr. King has said. But there's something different, and that is that here at the Women's National Democratic Club, there are many people working very hard and meeting with members of Congress and doing their best. And I know of others, the League of Women Voters, doing the same. Right. But I also worked on the Hill for 15 or 16 years, and I do know that they do pay more attention to the voters from their own state. The way to get around that is we all have relatives. I am from Oklahoma. I have relatives in Texas. I have friends all over the country. We get them to go to their members and do it for us, and that's how we get the power. We won't get it by ourselves. In fact, they won't even arrange a meeting for us with a member of Congress, but they will for their own constituents coming here from home.
I agree with that. When I was with the World Bank, was one of the ways in which we generated support for the bank by going into the states that did business with the World Bank, talking to their businesses, talking to their chambers of commerce, getting them to let their members know why it's important for the United States to support the World Bank. Yes, you have to go out of here to talk to the people they'll listen to, and they'll listen to their constituents. Walter Fauntroy did that very well against Johnny Mack, and it worked. But I must say, it doesn't work. I don't see evidence of that happening today by the political organizations in the District of Columbia, as far as working outside of the district and going into key states, key congressional districts, and talking to their people about what effect their representative is having on the District of Columbia. That's an organizing effort. That's a political organizing effort. And if it exists, it's gone past me. I haven't seen evidence of it to the extent that it's necessary anyway.
I have a quick comment on riders that are put on the D.C. appropriation budget. When we had Republicans on the council, they were very effective of going to the appropriations committee and getting some of those riders off. It's important, ladies and gentlemen, to have Republicans involved in our local government that way. Very important. And as Colby said, the eye contact, one-on-one, is very important. You sit down and they can get appointments and look them in the eye.
My name is Gottlieb Simon, and I've spent a lot of time with ANCs. The audience may have noticed that on the board there was a reference to advisory neighborhood commissions, and Nelson kept referring to advisory neighborhood councils. Well, that wasn't an error or a mistake or a confusion, because in the original bill, the Home Rule Act, They call them councils,
Councils.
not commissions. But they gave the District of Columbia Council the authority to legislate with regard to ANCs however they wished. And probably one of the first things they did in the existence of the DC Council was to change the name of the ANCs from councils to commissions, arguably because they were concerned people might be confused as to who the real council members were.
And that is, I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority.
Oh, you are?
Yes.
So is my
DST,
sister. So is my
Dorothy
sister.
Heights.
Really?
Yes.
What? I'm a what?
Are you going to Alpha? Omega?
She has, what?
Alpha? Kappa?
Kappa Alpha Psi.
All right then.
You know what AKA stands for?
Also known as.
After Kappa's always.
That's a joke.
After Kappa's always. You know what DST stands for? Damn same thing.
I just want to say one thing.
Cora Barry wanted to slap me when I said that.
Is we have a seat in the UN, Delta Sigma Theta. We also have Delta Days in the nation's capital. We also have days with the City Council of the District of Columbia, where people from all over, from all chapters, and we are now international, we are all over the world. And we come, and we go, and we walk those halls to get legislation. But the only thing what had to happen was, we are 501c3, so you know what that means. So we had to establish another category. So that gives us the opportunity to go and say what we want and what we look for our elected officials.
In fairness, you have to acknowledge that there are other Greek letter organizations as well doing the same thing.
I know. But I just want to say.
Like my wife, who is an AKA.
Well, I just want to say
My
one
sister's a
thing
Delta.
about, see, when they had the march, you know who was on that march fighting for rights? Delta Sigma Theta. They did not want us to be a part of it, but we got in there.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Okay. I wanted to just end with two brief comments. When I was sent over, the day I was sent over to meet Charles Diggs from the Library of Congress, I asked Walter Kravitz. He had, over the years, had worked on D.C. affairs. He was retiring. I said, do you have any advice? He said, remember, the District of Columbia is sui generis. It's one of a kind. And it certainly is. I wanted to end with a column, quoting a column that Colbert King wrote in 2001, the Parade of 63. He was 14 years old and marched with the Boy Scout troops in the parade, the inaugural parade. Well, the Boy Scouts were near the end of the parade. But they waited patiently. It was getting dark. It was almost dark. And as they passed where the president was, the stand was almost empty. There was the president almost alone, standing in the stand with his Homburg over his heart, saluting the Boy Scouts as they passed. This is how he described it in this column. By luck, I was on the left flank of the group, nearest the president's reviewing stand. The streets were dark. The moon was out. The crowds had thinned. As we drew abreast of the giant wooden structure, I was surprised to see a half-empty reviewing stand, bathed in bright lights. There, standing ramrod straight, with his black Homburg over his heart, was the President of the United States. Ike had waited for us. When I first read this column, 2001, I teared up. I read it again this morning, and I teared up again. I have copies of it if you'd like to read the whole column. It's very interesting. He talks a lot about his childhood here, growing up in Washington. Thank you.